We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 22nd of May, 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist. I'm Vincent McAviney. Coming up, Iran and Russia bind themselves together with a new strategic partnership agreement. We'll assess what each is getting out of it. Then,
there's nothing this parliament can do, with or without you. People are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one.
How Donald Trump used clips like that to make the South African president's Oval Office meeting as awkward as that of President Zelensky's. Plus, we meet a man who knows how to take the heat.
I was selected by the Guild of Finnish Sauna Masters, the Sauna Master of 2024.
We'll learn from the best what makes a great sauna. And of course, we'll have the papers, a leaf through the new edition of Monocle magazine, and get a roundup from the Nordics too. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. 2 Israeli embassy staff have been shot dead outside a Jewish museum in downtown Washington, D.C. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will sign a deal with Mauritius today to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reacted furiously after a warship was badly damaged in an accident during its launch ceremony. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories, but first, Iran's parliament has approved a 20-year strategic partnership between Moscow and Tehran. While it does not include a mutual defence clause, it does stipulate that both countries will work together against common military threats, develop their military technological cooperation, and take part in joint exercise drills. To discuss what this means, we're joined here now by Berku Ozilek, Senior Research Fellow for Middle East Security at RUSI. Berku, good to have you on the show. So this agreement, is there anything new, or is it just codifying the existing relationship between Iran and Russia?
Well, thanks for having me on this morning. It is effectively the approval, the parliamentary ratification of the strategic partnership agreement that was agreed earlier this year. This lays out a 20-year plan to boost economic trade and defense ties between Russia and Iran. It was not a surprise that it was approved by Iran yesterday by a majority. There were some discussions about the advantages. And both sides spoke, but it was clear, I think, for the most part, that this would go ahead. It is seen to align with Iran's national interests, but also at this critical juncture of fragility, uncertainty in the Middle East, I think it positions Iran as a state that is not as isolated as the United States would like to believe, that it is able to shore up key strategic partnerships with Russia, with China, which we've spoken about on The Globalist before as well. And so I think what's interesting about this is that Iran is building up its both regional and international network of allies and partners at this time where in the background, of course, ongoing are the very important nuclear talks with the United States.
And just how aligned are the two countries in terms of their geostrategic aims?
I think it's clear that there's some close coordination going on. There has, of course, been reporting and much discussion about Iran's supply of armed drones to Russia in its military offensive in Ukraine. Additionally, there have been reports of Iranian sort of soldiers on the ground as well in that fight against Ukrainian forces. And these, of course, have been contested and challenged by Iranian officials. So I think there is clearly close coordination going on between the two sides. There must be and is a supply of sort of equipment, military hardware, training, logistical support as well. But in terms of the wider question of, I mean, you mentioned the partnership agreement stops short of a mutual defense type agreement. I think that's significant. I don't think that either side would rush to each other's defenses in a scenario of a serious military escalation or threat. Much of this, I think, is sort of discursive gesturing and positioning in a global order that is fast changing. But while there is clear signaling going on, I don't think, for example, that Russia would rush to Iran's side if it was attacked militarily or there were targeted attacks against its nuclear or military facilities. I think that is a long way off.
Because speaking of that, I mean, the countries do diverge when it comes to their attitudes and policies towards Israel.
They do, of course. And this is an interesting point where Russia has, because of social, religious, community links, a close relationship with Israel historically. This is, of course, in strong divergence with the Islamic Iranian regime's posture on and toward Israel. And so this is a significant point of departure between Moscow and Tehran. But again, it's, I think, a clear indication that where interests align, particularly when it comes to boosting bilateral economic interests and boosting trade between two countries, Russia and Iran, that are heavily sanctioned and cooperate both covertly and in the shadows to bust some of the effects of international and U.S.-led sanctions. So I would say that this is very much in the interest of the economic aspect of the relationship.
And shifting, I mean, to military technology and Iran's nuclear program, I mean, the US thinks that Israel is set to strike some of their facilities soon. I mean, what would they in Tehran be expecting Russia to do in that scenario, given the sort of conflicting relationships?
Well, the issue, of course, is that Russia has its own complicated web of interests and priorities when it comes to navigating American foreign policy and the ins and outs of the Trump administration. And so it will be trying to strategically create distance from the Iranian file because of ongoing negotiations for some type of ceasefire or agreement over the conflict in Ukraine. And of course, this you're referring to recent reports that an Israeli strike might be imminent on Iranian nuclear facilities. Just to say that this kind of intelligence has been available and being reported for some time. It's not necessarily new. I think what is interesting about the story that came out yesterday is that it was potentially leaked. So the timing, I think, is quite interesting. I mean, it wasn't leaked, if it was, with the purpose of creating some type of leverage over Iran in the upcoming, I think it's the 5th round of talks between U.S. and Iran on the nuclear potential deal.
And I mean, where does this partnership agreement leave the deal? Does it make it more challenging?
I think it creates the perception, the posture from Tehran's perspective that a possible Israeli strike against Iranian military or nuclear facilities, a unilateral Israeli strike without American support would be costly, that Iran has valuable allies in the Gulf, as well as Russia and China, that would sort of work together in some way collectively to punish Israel or any other state actor that was threatening Iran's nuclear facility. So it's shoring up this perception of strength at a time, I think, again, this might be important at a time when Israel is facing increasing diplomatic isolation, and we've seen this trend accelerate in recent days. So there's an interesting dynamic there, where Iran is clearly trying to gain the upper hand in negotiations and sort of emerge from the shadows, because it was long cast, of course, as a rogue or a pariah state, and it's trying to shift that. And the strategic partnership with Russia, whilst not a mutual defense pact, is still significant in creating the perception of Iran's significance in the region and in the international global order.
And just finally, I mean, knowing that this agreement between Russia and Iran was coming, do you think this is why potentially we had that olive branch last week from Donald Trump towards Tehran when he was doing that tour of the Middle East?
Yes, I think that would probably be a motivation. Before President Trump came into office, on the campaign trail and after inauguration as well, there was a sense that he sought to use his relationship, so personal relationship with Vladimir Putin, as leverage over Iran, and perhaps to shape or inform American interests or its policy direction in the Middle East. I think the progress of the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire agreement, that deal, has not gone as quickly at the pace that the Trump team would have liked. It probably has soured Trump's outlook on Putin. And of course, I think last week, didn't he say that he was frustrated with that this hadn't come to a closure yet. But I think, in terms of the highly personalized style of Trump's diplomacy making, there would have been an element of seeking to use this close relationship with Putin against Tehran, perhaps kind of with some incentives as a carrot stick approach as well, but not clear at all whether that will work, because again, in this world of sort of high-powered, highly personalized politics and sort of so-called diplomacy, there's a lot of unpredictability in terms of we're relying on what these leaders want, their whims almost from day to day. But in terms of the Iranian perspective, I think that is pretty consistent in terms of their geopolitical positioning and their desire to continue to be able to project power and to reconstitute that power in the coming period.
Berchu Ozchelek of RUSI, thank you for joining us. This is The Globalist. It's 8:12 in Johannesburg, 7:12 here in London. Well, on yesterday's programme, we discussed the visit to America of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa ahead of his trip to the Oval Office, and it's fair to say that meeting went about as disastrously as expected, with Donald Trump using a TV in the corner lined up with clips to falsely claim that there is a genocide of white farmers taking place in the country. Well, Ferial Hafaji is associate editor at Daily Maverick and joins us now from Johannesburg. Ferial, firstly, as you watched that meeting go out, what were your initial reactions?
You know, when it first started, I thought, okay, this is going to go better than planned. It was genial. They seemed to be speaking as equals. And then when President Donald Trump ordered that the Oval Office lights be dimmed and the video came on, you know, oh God, here's something coming. And from there, I think it was pretty much downhill.
And, I mean, what's the reaction been like across South Africa?
Well, South Africans are generally an optimistic people, and because our president kept his calm and carried on, he didn't rise to the bait. they're reading it positively. He also held a briefing afterwards in which he said in the closed-door bilateral they had actually been able to get some substantive trade and other issues on the table, and he feels that it was an opportunity to reset the relationship, which in the end worked. I do feel that there was a public humiliation, and as the New York Times and others have said, a very clear ambush underway last night.
And I mean, the leaders around the world watched what happened to President Zelensky in horror, thinking
Yes.
that could be them. Do you think that he had maybe watched that carefully and, that staying calm, but then potentially, going out afterwards and trying to correct the narrative of what was going on? Is that the best strategy, or should he have been a bit more robust in the room?
So they obviously watched the Zelensky meeting very carefully. I'm sure they treated it like you would a game where you watch the plays of everybody. And officials told us that they were completely expecting an attack. They thought it might come from Secretary of State Rubio, who wasn't in fact in the room. But in the end, it was the president himself using this very crudely spliced up video and a set of photocopied media reports who launched and who fronted the attack. Many people here feel that the president did well. He didn't take the bait. He answered quite spicily on occasion. Some of my colleagues feel that he didn't put up a sufficiently robust a defense of the country and a rebuttal in the face of a very global and a globalized and televised meeting.
He did joke at one point that unfortunately he didn't have a plane to bring him.
I thought that was quite good, actually. Yeah, that there were other moments in there as well where we felt, okay, that was a nice line, huh?
Yeah. And I mean, just for anyone, listening to this that's not aware, I mean, these claims have circulated in the sort of far right for a long time. And the thought is that the likes of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who are South African originally, have really sort of been dripping this poison into Donald Trump's ears. And that is why, these fringe claims, which, if you want to sort of debunk them, feel free, explain why they're wrong. But they've made it all the way to the most powerful room in the world.
They are completely wrong. There hasn't been a single farm expropriated without a single piece of land expropriated without compensation from a white farmer since 1994. If you look, our country is violent, and criminal violence is often held to be out of hand, but it impacts poor Black people far more than it would farmers. I hate to make those kind of comparisons because it's all awful. But if you do look at farm murders as a category, it is actually coming down. But that's not to say that people who live in rural areas do not exist in a state of extreme fear and vulnerability. To, however, see it as only impacting one group of people, that is white Afrikaans farmers, is completely wrong, and I think has been debunked around the world, so much so that people will often discount the idea of a genocide very, very forcefully. Even the most conservative politicians realize that that's not what is happening here.
And there were obviously discussions behind closed doors. Do we know what those entailed, and was there any sort of conflict as well about South Africa's pretty robust position when it comes to Israel?
So we heard that the meeting was short. The president came out in quite a chipper mood. You'd have seen that the ICJ case, the case that South Africa brought initially and is still a part and is still a part of, likely to continue to be a part of for 8 years, on the genocide case at the ICJ. You'll see that President Donald Trump, in fact, said he wasn't that concerned about the case, and that did surprise us. So I don't think it came up. And early reports out of that meeting suggest that they were able to table the trade deal that they had been working on for quite quite a few months now, and put that on the table. Also to talk about AGOA, which is the trade access deal, very important to our motor manufacturing and citrus export industries, that they were able to in fact get to some substantive talks. I don't think any agreements were reached, but it's opened a door now. The most important thing for South Africa is that the US doesn't pull out of the G20, which happens here in November. And there's a little bit of hope now that Donald Trump may in fact come to have the baton handed over, because the US becomes the next chair of the G20.
Well, you preempted my final question, and that is, what are the thoughts around the G20? Donald Trump hasn't even confirmed that he will attend. So, what are the expectations?
So quietly, US officials are attending many of the 80 of the 140 PrEP meetings. So there has been some progress. They've stayed in the room and at the table. Whether the president arrives in November is anybody's guess. And what's likely to happen, according to the latest conversations that I've had, is they'd be happy to have a summary statement, even if not a document of consensus. Obviously, we're hoping that it is a full heads of state G20, because that will be good for South Africa and good for Africa.
Ferial Haffajee, thank you for joining us. Still to come in the programme.
That begs the question, will the U.S. be providing any future intelligence sharing whatsoever? Will the U.S. be providing any weapons of any kind? I suspect the answer in that case is no.
We hear from a former US ambassador to NATO about the Trump administration's handling of Ukraine. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
Well, let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, I'm pleased to say, is Nina Dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent and the former CNN Europe editor. Nina, good to have you with us this morning. What's caught your eye?
Thanks so much, Vincent. Well, obviously, one can't avoid the headlines surrounding Israel and, in particular, diplomats, European diplomats, but also this tragic news that has come out of Washington, D.C. overnight, that 2 Israeli diplomats have been shot dead by an individual as they were leaving an event at the Jewish Heritage Museum in the US Capitol. So obviously that has prompted some real concerns about the security of Jewish diplomats around the world, and in particular in the United States. And there's been some strong condemnation, obviously, from authorities all around the world about this attack.
And what we know so far, a 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez has been detained. As he was doing so, he was chanting "Free Palestine." I mean, this doesn't sound like it's a state-backed assassination. It sounds like it is someone who's particularly aggrieved about what is going on in Gaza, who's gone out and targeted Jewish people. And
there will be a lot of Jewish people around the world who witness these protests that take place in capital cities all around the world, including here in London, week after week, who will feel concerned about their own personal security. Here in London, obviously, there have been concerns that Iranian terrorists have been targeting the Israeli embassy in London, which is obviously the site of many protests over recent weeks. But this obviously speaks to international outcry as well over the situation in Gaza, where politicians in Europe, in the United States, elsewhere around the world, perhaps slightly less in the United States, but are increasingly coming under pressure to try and voice their displeasure with Benjamin Netanyahu's government back in Israel at the appalling situation that is unfolding in Gaza. Let's remember that the United Nations bodies just 2 days ago issued a very stinging rebuke to the Israeli government government saying that 14,000 babies could lose their lives to starvation and ill health within 48 hours. And that was a letter that was issued just on sort of Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning. Now, some trucks have been allowed into Gaza, but there are reports that they are not being allowed to distribute food aid and basic medical supplies. Now, speaking of diplomats, there's also been another skirmish that has been taking place over in the West Bank, where it seems as though 25 European diplomats were being shown around a refugee camp for Palestinians. And the Israeli IDF, Israel Defense Forces, apparently fired some warning shots at them. And that, again, just goes to show that there is this really ratcheting up of tensions between what were previously very staunch allies of Israel and obviously, pressure that they're facing to condemn what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah, and that follows Labour MPs from the UK recently being denied access to Israel, or Israel being sent back at the border when they flew in for this kind of visit. I mean, they're not... the game of winning hearts and minds in foreign capitals doesn't seem to be going very well.
No, that's right. And obviously one thing that may have irked Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is that Donald Trump has just come back from this enormous tour in the Middle East, where he embarked upon this whistle-stop tour with all these big Middle Eastern powers, and Israel appeared to be sidelined from those types of visits. And indeed, there's a report in the Times today, not just covering, for instance, what's happened overnight in Washington, D.C., and, of course, what's happened in the West Bank vis-à-vis these European diplomats who may or may not have been fired upon by Israeli forces as warning shots. They're also saying, could Benjamin Netanyahu now attack Iran, attack its nuclear facilities before the Trump administration in the US actually inks a nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, we're going to shift now to what is going on a little bit closer to where our studio is. The UK government is struggling with some pretty tough economic choices. They did get some good growth news earlier in the week, highest now in the G7, but we've also got inflation ticking up. So how's Labour responding?
Well, obviously, let's remember that this is coming hot off the heels from Reform's success in the local elections just a few weeks ago, when the insurgent far-right party started eating into the Labour heartland, so not just being a challenger to the traditional centre-right Conservative Party over here.
Although very curiously, their leader, Nigel Farage, what should have been a big week for him,
he was on holiday, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on holiday, which, do we think he's really on holiday?
Unusual for
Very
him,
suspicious.
having followed him around for about a decade and a half. He is a really committed workaholic.
Yeah.
He hits the campaign trail and doesn't lose any opportunity.
On holiday next week, so it's very strange that he is not around. I mean,
I think he's holding his cards pretty close to his chest, isn't he? And just allowing things to play out. This is the strategy, after all, that Keir Starmer employed a year or two ago in the run-up to his electoral victory in 2024 after 14 years of Conservative policies.
True,
he more or less...
This is a man who loves to live in front of the camera. But anyway, back to what Labour are doing.
I agree. My gut instinct would be that I'm slightly suspicious of Nigel Farage being absent at a time when obviously he could make a lot of hay or the sunshines politically upon Labour's endless U-turns. And that was what I was going to come to. Over the last week, interestingly enough, what we've seen is a series of leaks to the Daily Telegraph, which is the centre-right supporting very anti-Brexit paper. And a lot of these leaks appear to centre upon Angela Rayner supposedly calling for, raising taxes, cuts to benefits for migrants, and again this pressure on the government to try and soften some of its harsher policies in terms of cuts that could hit the poorest members of society. And that appears to have worked, because just over the last couple of days we've seen a U-turn from the government on a very controversial policy that meant that they were cutting winter fuel payments, but it wouldn't be means tested, and this would hurt poor elderly citizens who need to heat their homes in this country that, after all, is often cold. And so we're seeing the Labour Party being pushed by members, lefter members inside the party within their cohort in Parliament, pushed to repeal some of their more draconian cuts on some of the weakest members of society, including benefits for younger people who can't get on the on the job ladder because of mental health issues and health issues. And then also at the same time, we're also seeing this pressure coming from the right with Nigel Farage eating into Labour's territory with regards to getting tough on migration. So we saw Keir Starmer have this speech a couple of weeks ago where he quote unquote said the UK could risk becoming an island of strangers. Many people are uncomfortable with the tone that he used there because it could be borrowing from a very controversial far-right politician of years gone by, Enoch Powell. And so he's been getting tougher on the right, but there have been members of his own front bench who are more leaning towards the left, who have been advocating that the Chancellor gets softer on the poorest members of society, because, of course, Labour governments traditionally in this country say that they want to lift children out of poverty and lift people out of poverty.
And finally, children in Asia turning to AI chatbots for mental health support. Is this a good idea?
Now, this is a piece that was in The Guardian, and I blinked twice when I looked at the byline, which said, from Taiwan. And then actually, when I read the piece, I realised why, because obviously Asia has a very young, digitally savvy population because of the ferocious work ethic that people have in China, Taiwan and elsewhere. People spend a lot of time alone, and there's a lot of stigma attached to admitting that you might be suffering from mental health issues, which, let's face it, many people do when they're isolated. And so this journalist is looking into how there's been this proliferation of use by young Asians using ChatGPT, and also particularly in China where ChatGPT isn't allowed to be used, various other chatbots linked to DeepSeek technology, to find a friend online, to find a sort of therapist online. And what attracts them, if you read these quotes in this article, to this particular type of therapy is that they say, it's immediate. I can reach the person when I want.
Well, Nina Dos Santos, thank you very much. Here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. 2 Israeli embassy staff have been shot dead outside a Jewish museum in downtown Washington, D.C. The man and woman were a couple and were killed while leaving an event focused on helping Gazans. A suspect has been detained and was heard shouting "Free Palestine" as he was taken into custody. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will sign a deal with Mauritius today to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. The terms will allow the UK and US to continue operating a strategically important military base on one of the islands for an initial period of 99 years, in exchange for a multi-billion-pound settlement. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reacted furiously to a serious accident he witnessed during the launch of a new warship, calling it a criminal act. Parts of the 5,000-ton destroyer's bottom were crushed, tipping the vessel off balance, according to state media. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, for a look at another story we're following today in the Monocle newsroom, here's Monocle's Seattle correspondent Gregory Scruggs telling us about the increasing authority of Caribbean diplomacy on the world stage.
Next week represents a watershed moment for Caribbean diplomacy. Former Surinamese Foreign Minister Albert Ramden will be sworn in as the 11th Secretary General of the Organization of American States. The 5-year post is among the highest profile positions ever held by a Caribbean national. It comes as Barbadian Prime Minister Mia Mottley is considered an early frontrunner in the campaign for the next UN Secretary General, while newly oil-rich Guyana serves a term as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, just 4 years after St. Vincent and the Grenadines became the smallest ever country to do so. There's a Caribbean moment happening over energy security and cooperation on transnational organized crime, says Rebecca Bill Chavez, President and CEO of Inter-American Dialogue, an NGO specializing in democracy. These small states are reminding larger powers that they are not easily overlooked as mere tourism destinations and aid recipients come hurricane season. For example, Vincentian Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves hosted the talks in 2023 that calmed down a belligerent Nicolás Maduro over Venezuela's claims to the Essequibo region. That territorial dispute is sure to be a hot topic at this year's Summit of the Americas, held where else in the Caribbean. Delegates will converge in Punta Cana come December.
That was Monocle's Seattle correspondent Gregory Scruggs. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, why not sign up to our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. US President Donald Trump says he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin has had enough and is willing to end the war in Ukraine. After speaking with Putin for more than 2 hours on Monday, Trump said Russia and Ukraine would immediately start negotiations on a ceasefire. But he also said the US is prepared to walk away if there's no path forward. Washington reporter H.J. Mai attended a foreign policy summit in the U.S. Capitol this week and spoke with Ambassador Julianne Smith, who served as the U.S. permanent representative to NATO under the Biden administration. H.J. started by asking her what she thinks about the current administration's handling of the conflict in Ukraine.
Well, certainly we all want the war in Ukraine to end. But I think where I feel particularly troubled today is that I continue to see no indication that the U.S. administration is willing to apply pressure on Russia. At every turn, every engagement between the United States and Russia, it seems that the conditions for peace or a ceasefire shift. We have not seen any indication that the U.S. is going to use the tools at its disposal to force Russia to a position where they are ready to first agree to a ceasefire and then work on a proper negotiated settlement. My worry right now is that Putin feels like he has the upper hand. He can, quote, negotiate until the end of time. He can continue fighting on the ground, and he can continue killing people in Ukraine.
When you say tools that the U.S. has at its disposal, are you talking specifically about economic sanctions? Are you talking about, military supplies to Ukraine to help Ukrainian soldiers, fight this war? Or is there something else that we're missing?
Well, first and foremost, what we did during our time in office as the war was raging was to rally the international community to provide assistance to Ukraine, both in the form of economic support and actual weapons, so that they could continue fighting. Number one, I want to see that continue, not just through the summer, but beyond the summer. Two, we worked in close coordination with the European Union and all of our friends in Europe on those unprecedented economic sanctions, export controls, etc., so that Moscow would feel the pressure. And lastly, we worked to call out globally the fact that the PRC, Iran, and North Korea are now all contributing to the war effort in Ukraine, with the PRC providing those dual-use components that are so critical, with North Korea providing over 11,000 troops, and with the Iranians providing both attack drones and missiles. We now have a bigger axis of sorts that is coming together to help Russia. And we need to do everything we can to call out that cooperation and break up that cooperation, apply pressure not just on Moscow, but on the three countries that are directly assisting Moscow in this war.
Vice President Vance told reporters on his flight back from Rome that if we see there's no way forward to get to a ceasefire, get to a negotiated peace, this is not our war. We should then just stop supporting Ukraine and get out of it. How dangerous is that for not only Europe, but for, also the US itself?
Well, that's deeply troubling, because the last thing that we need is for the U.S. to be completely disengaged in the drive towards peace and in rallying the international community to come to Ukraine's aid. So if the U.S. walks away, if the U.S. administration walks away, that then begs the question, will the U.S. be providing any future intelligence sharing whatsoever? Will the U.S. be providing any weapons of any kind? I suspect the answer in that case is no. And then it places an enormous burden, first and foremost, on the people of Ukraine to figure out a way forward. But it also begs the question as to whether or not Europeans can fill the void. And my guess is that while Europe has done so much for Ukraine over the last 3+ years, They cannot do everything that the United States has been doing, particularly in the area of intelligence sharing. So what we could see if the U.S. decides to completely walk away and zero out all of our assistance is a collapse of the lines in Ukraine and a potential victory for Russia, which sends obviously the wrong signals to President Putin and the Russian people. It also spells disaster for the people of Ukraine, but it also sends the wrong signal to President Xi in China, who no doubt is watching events in Ukraine very closely.
You obviously served as the permanent representative to NATO under the previous administration. We're a little bit over a month out ahead of a NATO summit in The Hague. What do you think is the big concern of European countries when they look at what's going on in Washington and the potential support for NATO going forward?
Well, I think European allies are looking forward to having President Trump join them at the summit. He has indicated that he's going to the summit, and I'm thrilled to hear that. That's an important signal of the U.S. continued support for the alliance, commitment to the alliance. If he were not going, we could all be extremely worried. I know I would personally be very worried, but the fact that he's going is important. What I will also be watching out for, however, is whether or not President Zelensky gets an invitation. President Zelensky has been at every NATO summit since the war started, and NATO has made a considerable effort to move Ukraine closer to the alliance and offer enhanced support at every turn. I hope, one, President Zelensky comes to the summit, he's invited to the summit, and two, there will be some announcement at the summit as to what NATO allies can do going forward to continue to support Ukraine.
Last thing, you mentioned, President Xi and China's involvement several times. I'm wondering, especially from a European perspective, as you know, a lot of European countries, let's take Germany, for example, are very dependent on China as an economic market. How difficult is it for European countries, to be aligned to the US in a lot of ways, strategically, the shared history, but also needing that access to a Chinese market? How difficult is it for NATO members to strike that balance?
Well, what we tried to do inside the NATO alliance was to focus on what China was doing in and around the Euro-Atlantic area that could create vulnerabilities for alliance members. So we were very focused on Chinese investments in critical infrastructure. We were interested in China's use of economic coercion against NATO member states. We were interested in the ever deepening and evolving relationship between China and Russia so that we could raise awareness. Our approach, we, the United States, under President Biden's administration, we focused quite heavily on raising awareness of what China was doing in that Euro-Atlantic space so we could work together as partners. My concern right now is that this administration has not yet signaled that it wants to collaborate closely with Europeans on the China challenge. I think it would be a mistake to give up on that transatlantic project and leave Europe to develop its own isolated relationships with China separate from how collectively as transatlantic partners, we could take on some of those challenges stemming from China. I hope eventually we'll hear more from the current U.S. administration on how they see the United States and Europe working together on the China challenge. But right now, I don't see an indication that that's a priority, and I consider that a mistake.
Former US Ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, in conversation with H.J. Mai there. You're with The Globalist. It's 9:42 in Manama and 7:42 here in London. Well, the latest edition of Monocle Magazine hits subscriber mailboxes and newsstands around the world today. Issue 184 is an art special, so who better to talk us through it than Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture, Sophie Monaghan-Coombs. Sophie, what can readers expect from this edition?
Well, Vinny, as you say, it is an art special, so we have really beefed up the culture section and it's all about the visual arts. I want to highlight firstly our lead story, which is all about Bahrain, the tiny kind of island kingdom, which isn't much sort of talked about in the art world. And it's not like the other GCC countries, which are bringing in outside museums from around the world that have lots of partnerships elsewhere. It's more locally focused, and there's lots of really interesting characters and interesting things happening, people who are really building up the scene there, and it also just looks like a completely beautiful place. So I think that's a really wonderful story, firstly. And then elsewhere in the art special, we meet some really interesting collectors, painters. We've got a whole bunch of new galleries, museums that are opening around the world. We're really just highlighting what's new and the kind of best and brightest in the art world at the moment. One thing that's coming up, which it's worth pointing out as well, is Art Basel in Basel, which has a slightly silly name, but it is still the most important art fair in the world. And that's happening in mid-June. And so we've got an Art Basel preview. We're picking out some of our highlights. And one of the ones that I wanted to talk about specifically is the artist Lonnie Holley, who is this fascinating, amazing artist from America. He grew up in Jim Crow, Alabama. He had a really difficult and very traumatic upbringing, and a lot of that extraordinary life experiences in his visual work, which includes lots of really interesting sculpture. There's 2 opportunities to see him at Art Basel in Basel, so I think he's definitely one to look out for.
Will you be going along to that?
Yes, definitely. Monocle will be at both Art Basel in Basel and the Zurich Art Weekend, which is the weekend before, so you can expect lots of reporting from there.
Great. And you've also taken a trip to East London, to the former Olympic site.
Yes, the former media centre from the London 2012 Olympics is a brand new art museum. It's called V&A East Storehouse, and it combines being a museum and a working storage art facility. So it's a really unusual proposition. It means that you're going into these galleys and looking at all these shelves with lots of different artefacts, and you feel like you're behind the scenes. One of the things they've pioneered there as well is your access to objects. So you could say, I want to look at this poster from the 1920s, or I want to look at this piano from, the 18th century, and they will have to provide access for you. They make you an appointment, and you go and you can have a look. If you're a cabinet maker and you want to see the back of a wardrobe, that's centuries old, they'll make that happen. So it's really interesting.
Wow, that's fascinating. Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, thank you very much. That was Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture. And as I said, the new edition, 184, is hitting newsstands. I've got it in my hand. There's a really fascinating lead interview as well with Sir Johnny Ive, the former Apple designer, on his plans to try and transform San Francisco back to its former glories. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
Now, the Finnish Sauna Master of the Year, Alexander Lemke, has been in London to attend the Sauna Summit 2025. As a sauna guide and heater of the oldest public bath in Finland, he led a panel called the Holy Trinity: Fire, Ice and Lolu. Before taking the stage, he joined Monocle Radio's Tom Webb to talk about the importance of the sauna ritual.
I'm living in Tampere, in Finland, which is the official world sauna capital, because we have the highest density of public saunas in all of Finland. And at the heart of the sauna capital is Rajapoti sauna, because it's the oldest public sauna.
And it's accessible to the public with a fee. How much is it to go?
Usually, except you go to some special places, sauna is a very democratic thing, so it should be accessible to everyone. So the sauna fees are quite cheap. So if you come as a tourist, for example, you pay a little bit more, like 10 euros. But when you are local, if you live close to the sauna, you get like multi-court or even yearly court. So it gets down sometimes to €1 per sauna visit, because everyone should have access to sauna.
And even for tourists, €10 is incredibly cheap for an authentic Finnish experience. What is the experience at your sauna?
The concept that people have of Finnish sauna is very, very narrow outside of Finland. So I think it's usually this cabin next to a lake in the forest with a steaming chimney. And that, of course, is one part of the experience. But there are many, many, many more different sauna experiences. And the sauna where I'm working in, just to give you an idea, the sauna stove, I'm heating the sauna, it's the so-called kertalämmitä. It's preheated sauna. So the stove is almost from 3 meters high, and we have 1.5 tons of sauna rocks. So it's a really, really large sauna, and I heat the stove, and then the fire is gone at the end of the heating, and the heat for the sauna day just comes from the structure of the sauna and the stove. And it's extremely mellow, deep heat. It doesn't slap you in the face. It's pretty amazing. I always make this joke that this is actually the biggest or largest infrared sauna in the world, because we have 50 centimeter thick walls. They store the heat, and as Lassi said, these walls emitting this heat. Of course, there's no such thing as infrared sauna, but it's like a lot of heat coming, so it feels extremely pleasant. It penetrates your skin and your muscles and your tissue and everything. It's like, so that's I think the speciality of the sauna.
And how do you put water on it if it's so high up? If I'm sitting there and I'm not happy with the heat?
Again, so this sauna is completely, I think, unexpected for many people who come there, because it's special design. So basically the stove is so high that it kind of like covers 2 floors. So on the first floor, you wash yourself and you just sit below the sauna platform, and then you walk up to the sauna platform. But the way you create the löyly, or the steam, is very special. So you have, I think it's a little bit more than 2 meters long, like the ladle, very big one. And there's a special hatch. So the whole stove is basically closed. And every time you want to create löyly, you open the hatch and then you pour löyly. You create löyly. Actually, you don't throw it, because we are connoisseurs. So there's even a word for it, luodalöyly. That means you create löyly very slow on the same spot, and then you get this amazing, 3-dimensional, fantastic, fresh löyly, which is everywhere and which lasts a very long time.
And what is the history of your sauna? How far does it go back?
It goes back to 1906, and that part of the town where the sauna is, it's now like part of Tampere. It's called Pispala. But Pispala was not part of Tampere at that time, but it was kind of a workers' area. Later it became part of Tampere. And in this area there was no running water first. So they had to get water with horses there's 2 lakes on both sides of a hill. It's on a hill. And then they made some kind of a pumping station on top of the hill. And Rajapoti, where it was built, was the first spot where you had a hydrant. Which means you need water for a sauna to wash and to clean. So this was the first spot which had running water, and where people were meeting to clean, to talk about news, and actually also to get some water for their own homes. So they brought it back to your home. So this is a very social place. It has nothing to do with spa or wellness. It was a necessity, and sauna is always a multi-purpose room. It has different functions on different levels. So in a nutshell.
And then finally, if we can just talk about an award or an honour that was bestowed on you in 2024. What was that?
I was elected by the Guild of Finnish Sauna Masters, the Sauna Master of 2024, and this is done every year in August. And it was absolutely a surprise for me. I really didn't expect it. And it's not like you do some kind of education where you learn how to wave a towel. It's more related to actually kind of like promoting real, authentic Finnish sauna culture. So I have done some research projects about sauna culture, some artistic research projects for a long time. I made movies, books about sauna. So it's more related to that. So, that you take kind of like care of authentic Finnish sauna culture. So.
And then my final question is, What is that authentic sauna culture? I know it's very broad, but what is the essence of that experience?
It is very democratic, without any rules. You, depending on the sauna, you take off clothes and you just sit together, and either you talk with each other or you don't. And everyone can do it as he likes it, and there's no performance elements in the sauna, because sauna in itself, being in the sauna, the act of being in the sauna, is enough for Finnish people. That's what it's all about. You don't have to become the so-called morning warrior, where you go to sauna to boost your dopamine levels, and then you go to cold plunge and all these things, because self-optimization can be exhausting. And in Finland, it's just going to sauna, and you go either on your own or you go to meet your friends. You go to talk or you go to not talk. So, there's all kinds of things, and everyone just does it as he wants to do it.
That was Alexander Lemke, Sauna Master of the Year 2024, speaking to Monocle's Tom Webb. And listening to that was Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Borstov, who joins us now for a roundup of Nordic news down the line from the Finnish capital. Petri, first, your thoughts on saunas after that?
Well, I have to say, I've been to that particular sauna, Rajaportin sauna. It's one of the best I know. It truly is amazing. But one thing I do have to say, I went there with a couple of international friends from South America, and it was just very, very hot. They had to actually leave the sauna, but I really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, turning to more serious matters now. Finland has completed the first 35-kilometre of fencing on its Russian border, right as it's thought that there is a Russian military activity on the other side.
Yeah, that's correct, Vinny. So 35 kilometers have now been completed, and it's part of a larger plan to build a 200-kilometer barrier along Finland's border with Russia. It's a steel fence. It stands 4.5 meters high. It's topped with barbed wire and also comes equipped with all kinds of surveillance equipment, cameras and sensors. So, it's not something that you would climb over. And according to the Finnish government, it's a response, of course, to what the government claims is deliberate sort of channeling of migrants from the Russian side of the border. We saw that in 2023, and after that, the border's been closed. But what I find interesting here is that, this is 35 kilometers. They're planning to build 200 kilometers, but the border with Russia is actually 1,300 and I believe 40 kilometers long. So, they have their work cut out for them if they want to build a fence on the entire border. And if they don't, well, what's going to stop Russia from just sort of moving the migrants, 35 kilometers north of wherever the fence is?
And, is the fence reassuring Finns, or are they getting a bit nervous about this build-up on the other side? That's a good question. I think the fence in and of itself is not reassuring Finns. I think Finns understand that this, they know the border is really, really long, and a lot of Finns see this more as a sort of a media stunt, grabbing the headlines and just showing that Finland is taking things seriously. But regarding the build-up, so I think there's a general understanding in Finland that Russia is really has all its resources in Ukraine, that it's not really threatening Finland. And then our recent joining of NATO, of course, gives us reassurances as well, and just the presence of NATO troops in Finland and all the exercises here as well. And citizens in Latvia, they're being taught lessons about how to spot Russian spies. This line, a shabby, unkempt appearance and insufficient hygiene might be a telltale sign, apparently.
Yeah, so I think Latvians are maybe resorting to some pretty nasty stereotypes here. This is a story in The Guardian. Actually, I read, I thought it was quite humorous, to be honest with you. So as you said, yeah, telltale signs of spotting Russian spies: shabby, unkempt appearance, insufficient hygiene, but then also overly nosy small talk with the locals. So apparently you're a spy if you engage in nosy small talk. I think I might have a few spies here in my building where I live. But then also this is kind of like, it says a short military-style haircut, outdoor survival equipment, medical kits, maps and radios, and lingering near sensitive sites. So, do the citizens really need to be told all of this? If you see somebody who looks like ex-military with all this kind of gear next to sensitive sites and asking questions, it's kind of obvious that, well, maybe this should be reported. But, all the joking aside, it's still the fact that the government agency advises its citizens on how to spot spies tells us that obviously there is a lot of spying activity going on in Latvia.
And back here in the UK, we've had the experience of Russian spies, the Salisbury poisoning, and they definitely were that kind of appearance, and particularly interested in visiting a certain cathedral, they said. So, yeah, does seem quite apt. Well, Petri Burstoff, thank you very much for joining us here on The Globalist. Well, that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Anita Riota, Chris Chermak and Monica Lillis, our researcher Francesca Giltz, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday London time. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow with me, Vincent McAviney. Thank you for tuning in.